A couple of years ago, Mimi Rogers, our curator, contacted Jamil Zenaldin, who is the president of the Georgia Humanities Council. She contacted him as part of her initial research on this topic, and Jamil advised her to postpone the series for another year so it would coincide with the celebration of the prize. He also told her about the Campfire Initiative. The Pulitzer Prize Centennial Campfire Initiative is a joint venture with the Federation of State Humanities Councils. The initiative focuses on journalism and the humanities to imagine their future and to inspire new generations to consider the values that are represented by Pulitzer Prize-winning work. We're honored that the Pulitzer Centennial has added our series to their website as a significant campfire initiative. I look forward to this series every year. Personally, it encourages me to explore topics that I may have otherwise missed. In preparation for the series, I've read Lamb in His Bosom by Caroline Miller, and I'm reading the Pulitzer biography by James McGrath Morris, and I've enjoyed both of them very much. We truly hope the lecture series will expand your horizons as it has mine. Please remember that the last lecture is a book discussion on Lamb in His Bosom, and you still have plenty of time to read that before September 15th. Okay, I'd like to take just a minute and to take a break from the Pulitzer and to give you a quick update on the Coast Guard Station project. The restoration should be completed by the end of the month, and the Historical Society is very grateful for Glenn County's funding of the project and committing to additional site work in the fall, which is specifically the addition of a drainage pipe around the Wood Avenue and the First Street elevations to eliminate the ditch that's there. The county has also removed some utility poles that are no longer in use and taken other positive steps that are very much going to improve the overall appearance of the station and the site. In early June, we appointed Gallagher and Associates to design the exhibits for the new museum. You may have heard of Gallagher. They're the lead designer at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. I encourage you to visit their website. It is fantastic to see some of the other projects that Gallagher has worked on and is working on. One of them is the College Football Hall of Fame in Atlanta, which maybe many of you have visited. Gallagher has also confirmed that we're on track to open the new museum in the spring of 2018. Although our relationship with Gallagher is new, Wells Fargo Advisors has generously supported this series for 6 years in a row. So I'd like to ask Kevin Loki, where are you, Kevin? And Marion Moore in the back. He's also a board member, so he's being polite in the back. Wells Fargo Advisors has been partnering with us for 6 years, and it's just wonderful to have their support, so thank you. This year's series will explore the connections between our state and the coveted Pulitzer Prize. Over the next few weeks, scholars and authors will focus on winners in different categories and also the impact of the prize. The series begins tonight with an early recipient, playwright Eugene O'Neill, who won 4 prizes for drama. He and his actress wife, Carlotta, built a Sea Island cottage to escape the hectic pace of New York City. Our speaker, Dr. Dowling, is a professor of English at Central Connecticut State University. He serves on the editorial board of the Eugene O'Neill Review, and he's written a number of books about O'Neill. He was the author of the acclaimed biography, which was published in 2014, called Eugene O'Neill, A Life in 4 Acts. This book was a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize for Biography. I read many wonderful reviews on Dr. Dowling's book, and I'd like to share a couple of them with you. Eugene O'Neill's themes are reflective of the great themes of both Irish and American theater, migration and the use and abuse of memory. O'Neill belongs to both the literary canons of America and Ireland. Robert M. Dowling's definitive and compelling biography greatly enriches our understanding of O'Neill's influences, the price and pain of his struggle, and its realization. We're indebted to Dowling for this fine, informed study of a giant of literature which we share. This review is by Michael D. Higgins, the President of Ireland. The next review is by John Walsh of the Sunday Times in London. And he said, "Most writers' lives are slow, desk-bound things. O'Neill's life, by contrast, was crammed with incident. Robert M. Dowling, a world expert on O'Neill, tells his story with pace and narrative skill, never getting bogged down in plot exposition or textual analysis." So with those glowing endorsements, please help me welcome Dr. Robert Dowling.
And when they first got in touch with me, they said, I said, well, how many people are you expecting? They said, 150, 200 people. I was like, yeah, right. 230 people are here tonight. I hope she didn't promise you that I was going to bring Eugene O'Neill himself out on the stage like Dr. Caligari or something. And regrettably enough, I'm not here to talk to you because I won a Pulitzer Prize, but my subject did, as Sherry said, win 4. And he also won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1936. He is the only American playwright to date to win that award. But who cares about the Nobel? The Pulitzer, there we go. Celebrating the centennial. And when I was in graduate school, I'll just give you this kind of anecdote, but it's going to be participatory. When I was in graduate school, there was a kind of trick question. Can you name an American playwright before Eugene O'Neill? And can anybody name an American playwright before Eugene O'Neill? Raise your hands. Right? Okay. And one of the reasons for that, really, is his first Pulitzer Prize winning play, Beyond the Horizon, won the Pulitzer for 1920. Before O'Neill, now, obviously now I can name plenty of them. There was a guy named Clyde Fitch who was on a lot of people's minds and a couple of other people. But before Eugene O'Neill, Broadway and the theater world, the circuit world around the nation in general, was really hogtied by a group of very determined producers, managers, the Schubert brothers, very famously on Broadway, who owned so many theaters then and still do today, and something called the Syndicate. And they, promoted melodrama, comedies, epic romances, but the number one qualification for a production, for it to be produced on Broadway, was a happy ending. You had to have a happy ending. And actually, can anybody name the first Pulitzer Prize for drama? This is Jesse Lynch Williams. Okay, we've all heard of him, right? Again, before O'Neill. It was a comedy called Why Marry, and people thought it was very funny about divorce and marriage, and it was kind of Shavian. It was sort of like George Bernard Shaw. So people respected him for that, got great reviews. But Beyond the Horizon was special because it did not have a happy ending. It had a quite tragic ending. And it was the first full-length play that O'Neill wrote that was produced. And it's the first full-length play, certainly, of O'Neill's that was produced on Broadway. And it concerns, and basically what I'm going to do today is just go through a few of his Pulitzer plays and explain why they were so important, why they won the Pulitzer Prize, why O'Neill is considered our foremost American playwright, and then it works ourselves right up to Casa Janata and his period there, which I think you'll find pretty fascinating. Beyond the Horizon deals with two brothers who grow up on a Massachusetts farm. One brother is a kind of poetic, starry-eyed soul, and he's looking for life beyond the horizon, and he's going to sign on to a ship, and he's going to sail the world. And the other brother is a real, get your hands dirty, New England granite kind of farmer. But in an ironic twist of fate, O'Neill's all about ironic twists of fate, they are both in love with the same woman. The woman decides that she loves the poet, so he decides to stay on the farm. His brother Andrew decides to go on the ship, and tragedy ensues. And the reaction to, and actually I'll just say one more thing about O'Neill's gaining the Pulitzer Prize through unhappy endings is the fact that his father, James O'Neill, was a famous matinee idol, and most famous for playing the role of Monte Cristo in the dramatic adaptation of The Count of Monte Cristo, Dumas' Count of Monte Cristo. And O'Neill watched his father, decade after decade, play this role over 6,000 times. And as a young man, he absolutely looked down on his father. And his father always wanted to be a great Shakespearean actor, and instead he, quote, sold himself out, unquote. And it was really that, watching his father sell his soul in this way, and his father believed this too, it's not just O'Neill being judgmental, watching his father sell his soul in this way that led O'Neill to say, I will never sell out. And if there's one thing I want you to take away from this lecture, is that Eugene O'Neill is the first, and I can almost say the last in many ways, and we could talk about this later, American playwright to bend Broadway to his will and not the other way around. That playwrights had always been considered kind of workman-like hires that they would just get in to, fix the structure of the plot or what have you. They weren't considered great artists. O'Neill would have none of that. And Broadway capitulated. It took a little while, but they did. So and in fact, actually, I'll just read you, there was pushback about this among the Pulitzer Committee. The literary lion Hamlin Garland said that to reward O'Neill for his violent and turgid style, his ruthlessness for the sake of ruthlessness would merely cheapen the award's gravitas. And of course, it's done quite the opposite over the years. Now, when O'Neill found out that he had won the Pulitzer Prize, he had never heard of the prize. And he gave out a Bronx cheer, which I won't, I'll save the front row here, but put your tongue between your lips and blow as hard as you can. That's how he felt about it. He also said, oh my God, I won an award, they're gonna make me want to give a speech. I mean, he would never do something like what I'm doing right now, which I find understandable. And then he found out that the Pulitzer Prize came with $1,000. This is O'Neill running down the beach after just being informed that the Pulitzer Prize came with $1,000. He, of course, at the time was a starving artist. This, unfortunately, is not Sea Island Beach. This is, or a beach on Sea Island. This is Provincetown, and where he wrote Beyond the Horizon, and also where he wrote the second Pulitzer Prize-winning play, Anna Christie. He won that 2 years later. He was living at the time he was married at the time to Agnes Bolton, the beautiful Agnes Bolton, who was quite an accomplished fiction writer of her time. And they lived in Peaked Bar, which is a former life-saving station in Provincetown. Now, I don't know how many of you know the geography of Provincetown, but it's really sort of, if you can think of Cape Cod, it's that curling sort of scorpion-tail, tip right at the end, Land's End, as the locals call it. Well, where Peaked Bar was located, so the town is here, Peaked Bar is located out here. And it was very difficult mule carriage ride on occasion, hiking, sure, to get from this house through the dunes, through the pine forests, and to the town itself for supplies and so forth. Perfect for Eugene O'Neill. Perfect for the isolated artist. And as you can see, he's got a lookout here, looking out over the North Atlantic. There's a spiral staircase that goes up to it from his writing studio, which will come into play a little bit later in my talk. But that sea, that vision of the sea, had always been enormously important to him. He had written a series of very well-received, groundbreaking one-act plays for Greenwich Village audience. Ultimately, one of them moved up to Broadway, so there was a one-act play before Beyond the Horizon on Broadway. But he finished Anna Christie here, which brings in sort of the next thing about why he would be singled out as a prize winner, which is that, in the past, Jack London, Stephen Crane, Joseph Conrad, these writers had done a great deal to write about the adventures of the open sea. O'Neill himself had worked in the Merchant Marine. He had taken a four-square rigger Norwegian bark down to Buenos Aires. He took a steamship back up to New York. He took a steamship to Liverpool and back. And so he really knew the life of the sea. And so he was filling this gap on the American stage. Nobody had represented the sea on the American stage. And so he filled this niche, and he did so with extraordinary power. And Anna Christie, if you just think of him staring off into the North Atlantic and just the power of the sea, Anna Christie is an example of what we call naturalism. Naturalism is not exactly what it sounds like. It's not about writing about nature and that kind of thing. It's basically a philosophy that individuals do not have control over their own lives. That external forces like nature, but also like war, like the economy, like those are external and internal, like disease and heredity and sex drive. We've all experienced, each of these in our own way, that these are forces that are beyond anybody's control. And that if somebody, so individual agency, the ability to make your own choice, which is so American, he flips on its head and say, no, that these characters are kind of destined in one way or the other. In Anna Christie, a prostitute from the Midwest comes back to New York to reunite with her father, Chris Christopherson, who's a Swedish, is this thing working? Yes? Who's a Swedish, no, it's not. Okay, let's see. Maybe I should just stick it on the... Leanne, help. Maybe the battery's at. I can project, if that's okay. Yeah, is that... There's another one? Oh, this one here?
There's a on button on that.
Okay, let me just try this one more time. No, okay. Okay? Okay. So she reunites with her father, Chris Christopherson, who doesn't realize she was a prostitute, and he takes her out on a journey on his barge. He's a barge captain, and she finds out on the sea, and especially in the fog, this incredible cleansing power. And she feels like she had been cleansing her from these kind of horrible acts that had happened to her over the course of her young life. And she feels as if she finally belongs. And, O'Neill was an atavist, meaning that he really believed that heredity had something to do with the future, with the behavior of future generations. Anna Christie was, the sea was in her blood. She was from a Swedish seafaring family, and she finds herself just in ecstasy out on the open sea. During their voyage, they rescue an Irish sailor named Matt Burke, Matt and Anna fall in love. Matt doesn't know that she used to be a prostitute either. Very difficult for her. Finally, she informs the two men who love her that she had been a prostitute. It takes some time for them to get over this fact, during which time they sign on for ships to leave her. But then ultimately, Matt loves her so much that he asks her to marry him, and in the end, they're going to be married, even though the two men are going to go off to sea. Now, everybody was shocked that Eugene O'Neill, the master of the misbegotten, the black magician of theater, the dean of dysfunction, would actually write a happy ending play, right? This is comedy. Comedy ends in marriage, tragedy ends in death, and there we are. And as a result of all of these notices coming in, all these reviews coming in saying it's this wonderful comedy about Eugene O'Neill where, the ending is happy, he said, no, they didn't get it at all. He wrote a retraction in the New York Times. You people don't understand what I'm saying. That basically the sea had taken back, as a naturalistic force, had taken this family back and would most likely punish them for having tried to escape it in the first place. Nevertheless, it is an astonishing fact that the Pulitzer Prize Committee and at Columbia and American audiences in general, because it was a huge smash success, would accept a prostitute as being given a happy ending in the end, as early as 1922. Prostitutes were supposed to die, preferably by suicide, because suicide meant there was redemption. But here she does not die, and yet audiences applauded it. They bought the books. He won the Pulitzer Prize, and on we go. And actually, I'm going to read just again. There was pushback for this, and again, O'Neill never wavered in his determination not to sell out. And the Pulitzer was meant. These detractors said the Pulitzer was meant for the play, and some of you may be familiar with this language, best representing the educational value of the stage and raising the standards of good morals, good taste, and good manners. And meanwhile, critic Patterson James says she swallows drink after drink and smokes cigarette after cigarette, all in the interest of good morals, ? And of course, if any of you have seen the film version with Greta Garbo, it's the first film where Greta Garbo speaks in 1931, maybe. And her first words that the whole world hears is, "Give me a whiskey, baby, and don't be stingy." and the bartender says, "Well, you want me to serve it to you in a bucket?" And she says, "That'd suit me down to the ground." So, once again, he's not worried about what it takes to get a Pulitzer. He just seems to be getting them. Okay. The next place that they moved was Spithead. This is his redoubt in Bermuda on Hamilton Harbor. Talk about house envy, right? I mean, this place is fantastic. In fact, I went down there on a research trip in 2008, and that's what it looks like today. Magnificent. It was at Spithead that he wrote Strange Interlude, which got him his third Pulitzer Prize in the decade of the 1920s. Strange Interlude is fascinating for a number of reasons, and I'm not going to go into the plot because it's way too convoluted. There are 9 acts. It's one of the longest plays that had ever been written up to that point. But O'Neill was getting severely frustrated by the limitations of the stage. And I'll explain. The problem with the stage after Ibsen, Chekhov, and the realists of the late 19th century is that to be a modern playwright, you had to make your plays realistic. So, in other words, no soliloquies, right? Because in real life, somebody doesn't stand on the side and say, to be or not to be. In real life, they talk to one another and they go through social issues, and these are things that actually happen. Now, the problem O'Neill saw with that is, with no soliloquy, there's no way of expressing the inner thoughts, the inner psyches of the actors on the stage, of the characters on the stage. And so he really, really envied novelists. He was very much a frustrated novelist, because novelists, of course, had everything that playwrights didn't. They could tell you exactly what each character was thinking and why, and get into their psyches and so forth. So what he did was, with Strange Interlude, is he had what he called thought asides. And basically what that meant is that people would speak, about half or more of the dialogue are thought asides. People would speak what they're consciously thinking, and the rest of the people on the stage would freeze. It was interesting, actually. The director, Philip Moeller, who figured this out, didn't know how to do the thought aside on the stage. He couldn't figure it out, and then he was on a train in New Jersey, and the train had an emergency stop, and everybody on the train froze, and then he had his idea. Okay, everybody on the stage who's not speaking freezes. And this novel as play, or play as novel, was very much understood to be that, and it became a real cultural phenomenon. And I mean, so much so that, we've got standing room only here, which is so terrific, but there was standing room only months into the production, well into the summer, in these sweltering, unair-conditioned auditoriums, and the play is 9 acts, 4.5 hours, and and O'Neill said, Jesus, I wouldn't spend 4.5 hours standing to see the original production of The Crucifixion. All right. In the summer of 1926, O'Neill started a relationship with the beautiful actress Carlotta Monterey. This is Carlotta after O'Neill and she decided to go off together, and they abandoned they abandoned Agnes with O'Neill's 2 children, Una and Shane, and went to Europe. They traveled around France for a while, then they took a long eastern they went to Singapore and Hong Kong and various, Ceylon, as it was called, Sri Lanka was called. Finally, they settled in the middle, near Tours in France, at the Chateau de Plessis, which you're looking at here. There's Carlotta, the sort of, grand dame of the chateau. O'Neill would write in this turret here. I'm quite certain that that's the turret. In that turret, he wrote "Morning Becomes Electra," which, Strange Interlude. Most people don't know this, by the way. Strange Interlude, when it won the Pulitzer Prize and made such a big splash, put O'Neill on the map for the Nobel. He was on the short list. They wanted an American. They knew that. But they didn't know who. So O'Neill, Theodore Dreiser, and Sinclair Lewis were put on the map. And Strange Interlude had done that. Morning Becomes Electra is the play that the Nobel Committee decided, that's the tipping point, he deserves it. And they give it to him later in 1936. They go back to New York, and after being back in New York for the rehearsals of Morning Becomes Electra, he's fed up with the rehearsals, he's fed up with people, he's fed up with New York, he's fed up, he's just fed up. And so they need a vacation. So where do they go? The cloister. Recommended by the actress Ilka Chase. They went to the basically brand new, just a few years old, resort on Sea Island. They stayed there for a month. This is this is November, early December, November, December 1931. Within 2 or 3 days, Eugene O'Neill and Carlotta Monterey have decided this is where they want to live, Sea Island, Georgia. That's it. They very quickly contact the Sea Island Company, which of course is still in existence. And they say, okay, am I right about that? So there's an archivist out there who's telling me about the Sea Island Company, but it may just be their archives. Okay. Okay, yes, no, right? It's changed hands. Okay. Yeah, because I think I looked it up to try and find something, and it wasn't. Anyway, it doesn't matter. You know what I'm talking about. And they hired Francis Abreu, the Georgian architect. Am I getting the pronunciation wrong? Abreu. And he drew them up this sketch of Casa Janata, which would be their home. Now, they bought the land, and actually, they bought the land for $12,600. This was the Great Depression. Okay, so this is they move in May of 1932, and the adjoining lot, the person had just completely gone under, completely gone bankrupt, so they bought the same size lot for $5,000. So the entire cost of building Casa Janata plus the land was $100,000. And now, even though it's the Great Depression, Carlotta and O'Neill were not really interested in stocks and bonds, and so they had kept most of their money. And he had made a fortune on Strange Interlude. He made a fortune on Morning Becomes Electra. Morning Becomes Electra paid for this house, that three-play trilogy that's so fabulous. If you ever get a chance to see it, you really need to do so. And actually, somebody made me promise to tell this story. Horace Liverite was O'Neill's book publisher, and he really did write like a novelist. So you could really read O'Neill's plays like novels and enjoy them immensely. I do, and my students do. I mean, you can, if you like this sort of thing. But I wouldn't suggest reading them only the way I have. But I mean, gets into your head. But what am I going to say about that? Oh yeah. So Horace Liverite was his publisher, and Sax Cummins, who was O'Neill's editor at Horace Liverite and also his very best friend, read the writing on the wall, and being such a good friend of O'Neill's, he got the board members together, or all the major shareholders of Horace Liverite, and who was publishing T.S. Eliot and William Faulkner and all these incredible, and he said, we want all the money you owe him right now, today, or I'm going to put in a full-page ad in the New York Times saying that Eugene O'Neill is going to your competitor. And the blackmail worked. And they gave him all the money that they owed Eugene O'Neill, and Sax Cummins took the train down here and hand-delivered the check to O'Neill at Casa Janata. Meanwhile, right after that, all of the rest of Horace Liverite's authors got 5% of what they were owed. So he was doing pretty well. He survived the Depression quite well. And I'll just and went on and then that very same summer, Bennett Cerf comes down from Random House and immediately picks him up, and Random House becomes his publisher. Okay, there's another great picture of Casa Janata. I'm just going to read to you from the description. They did a piece in house and garden on it once it was built. And this is what the writer described the architectural design as. He said it was a combination of the early Majorcan peasant house of the 16th century, tinctured with a flavor of the 15th century monastery, found in such houses in Sierra de Cordova as the estate of the Marquise del Merito. But for the benefit of guests, Monterey boiled this down to the more concise terminology, bastard Spanish peasant style. And so, all right. This. Okay. So I'm just going to go through some photographs that I took in May of 2013 of Casa Gennata. There it is. And you can see how, houses are on either side of it. It's no longer sort of, stuck in the middle of the sand the way it had been when it was first built. This next one's sort of an odd one, but we'll see how it comes out. That's a panorama shot of the inner courtyard of the back of Casa Gennata. Modernized with a pool, of course. And here's the beachfront property. Very much, of course, this is something that Eugene O'Neill would have felt very much at home in and or at home at, and looking over farther south on the Atlantic, but it's still the Atlantic. And he was a great swimmer, by the way. People said he used to swim like a South Sea Islander. He just really was an exceptional swimmer and could swim for miles. He was very, very good, and he loved to do it. And so this is O'Neill on the left with George Ball of the Sea Island Company. I can't tell which guy is having more fun, but they became very good friends. And what's funny about this is George Ball was not that high up in the Sea Island Company, as I understand it. He was sort of a low-level construction guy, basically. But that's exactly the type of person that O'Neill became friends with. The high society people of Sea Island were delighted when they heard that the celebrity playwright, by the way, celebrity playwright before Eugene O'Neill was an oxymoron. There was no such thing. So this celebrity playwright was moving into our midst. We were going to have wonderful balls for him and gala dinners and all this stuff. And he would, hopefully reciprocate. He wanted none of it. And, the few people who actually saw him, I just met a gentleman who was on Sea Island when O'Neill lived there, did not see him. A few people that actually saw him said that he was like a gun-shy dog. You'd sort of say hello, and he'd go running in the opposite direction. Oh, yeah. So O'Neill called Bowl the demon realtor who tempted us to fall for Paradise Island. Sort of, lapsarian description. And Ball said something funny because he said, everybody thinks Eugene O'Neill is this kind of grumpy, horrible person. Not at all. He's funny, he's nice, he's sweet, he's a great friend. The two of them, although O'Neill was theoretically had quit drinking alcohol in 1927. We can talk more about that later. But he and Bowl built a still, I believe, in the garage of Casa Gennata. Of course, it's Prohibition as well as Depression. How depressing. And one Christmas night, they just got really drunk and on beer. And then Carlotta found O'Neill up in his writing room drinking whiskey from the bottle, and she was outraged. And this was actually something that happened periodically. Most people believe that O'Neill quit drinking in 27 and that was it. Not true. He did every now and then fall off the wagon, but he did a remarkable job of it in general. It was very, few and far between, but boy, when he fell off hard. Okay. Oh, actually, you know what? Before we get there, I just want to read you. I found an unpublished letter about Sea Island and the Depression at the University of Virginia, and I just thought the description was fantastic. And this is related to this picture. He said told a friend of his, "Georgia's a very good spot to spend the Depression in." At least the backward neck of it, he wrote, his friend Robert Sisk. "The only depression they've caught up with is the one inaugurated by General Sherman and General Hookworm." "One thing I know," he said, "starving isn't on the cards for anyone down here, no matter what happens. Fish, oysters, shrimps, clam, game are to be bagged even by the laziest. Perhaps it was Providence that guides me here, having an eye for the future when I become too lazy and disgusted to bother the drama further." And that passage inspired me to get the fish camp platter at Mullet's last night. It's very much everything he enumerates in here is in there somewhere. Okay. The house itself. Well, the house is called Casa Genata because it's the house of Jean and Carlotta, a portmanteau of the two of their names. Interesting about the architecture of this house is that it's separated into two wings, and there's a courtyard between them, and they're kind of monastic connector that connects them. This is really Carlotta's wing. Inside there is what's known as the Great Room, and it's built, and Carlotta's bedroom and boudoir and lookout are all patio are all up there. But there's the Great Room, and it's built to be a medieval theater because she's the great actress. And I have to say, she had a very strong hand in the architectural design. And when they moved back to New York after the cloister, she and the architect went back and forth. I'm afraid to say his name, Abreu, excuse me. Went back and forth about the design. This is what she wanted for hers. Now, I'll tell you, the Great Room is fascinating, but for me as a researcher, the most fascinating room in the house was her bathroom. And I'll show you why, and then I'll explain a little bit more about that after I get through O'Neill's side of the house. So look at this Gothic niche as her medicine cabinet to look at through as if she was the Holy Mother. And that's my niece over from Ireland who came on me with a research trip, and she's being ironical, of course. And then, the niche of the bathtub and the niche over there, and it's fascinating because it really shows what everybody had kind of imagined, which was that Carlotta had gone back to her Catholic faith in a way that O'Neill was a famous atheist. And so these two were sort of living side by side. But O'Neill's going through some really tough times and falling off the wagon. And so her Catholic faith really influenced him. But just before we get to that, here's it's still O'Neill's house, so there's a New Orleans brothel door leading to the guest room. And this is O'Neill's wing, which is obviously designed to look like the stern leveling of an 18th century galleon ship. Very merry time. And that's his writing desk. This is, there are the windows overlooking the sea. And I'll just show you quickly, there's spiral staircase that goes up, which there was also in Peat-Till Bar, and also like in Peat-Till Bar, it comes up to a lookout. So when he's kind of stopped writing and he wants to think over a line or two, he'd go up there and look out in the sea and get enormous inspiration from that. What was he writing there? Well, there's good news and there's bad news. Okay. The good news is that he was writing A Wilderness, which he wrote in 3 weeks in 1933 and 32. Sorry about the poor quality of the image. It's entirely my fault. Raise your hands if you've ever seen A Wilderness. Probably quite a few of you, yeah. Because it's revived all the time. People still love it. It was an enormous hit at the time on Broadway, huge hit. But then he also wrote Days Without End. Days Without End was supposed to be the second part of a planned trilogy called God is Dead, Long Live What? And his first play for that was Dynamo, which he had written in France and was a complete flop on Broadway. And in that one, in Dynamo, electricity was to take electricity and technology and science was to take the place of God. And then this was going to be the second one, and then there was going to be a third one about money, which he just never finished. This is going to be the second one where human love takes over from God. The only problem with that is, look at this is the final scene. Human love, okay, but you can imagine how the modernist critics and colleagues of his in New York would look upon this massive crucifix at the end of it, and the final lines are, life laughs with God, God is love, life laughs with God's love. And really there's basically no other way to read the play, and I have sort of some smoking guns that show that it is a pro-Catholic play, and did a great job in Dublin where they loved it, and Yates put it on at the Abbey Theatre. And it was forbidden in Russia and the Soviet Union, of course, because they're atheists and they want nothing to do with this play. But generally speaking, it was panned to the ground. And O'Neill always read his reviews. Sometimes he would read bad reviews and he'd say, that's good. I thought I was getting too popular, to be honest. It's no big deal. But this time it really hit him hard, and he had worked on this play a great deal. He'd gone through many drafts over a series of about 3 years, and he just couldn't make it. He couldn't make it work, and he went into a massive depression, a deep depression, from which he would basically never emerge. The time that follows the appearance of Days Without End in 1934, O'Neill scholars call the silence, because another new O'Neill production wouldn't go on the stage until 1946, 12 years later, with The Iceman Cometh. Now, I can tell you, the good news is also while he was at Casa Janata, he wrote a full draft of A Touch of the Poet, which is my absolute favorite Eugene O'Neill play, actually. Very Irish play. It's a wonderful play. He finished it later in California. There's other things, but I'm going to keep this short. But so they leave. He's so depressed, and the heat, and the humidity, and the rattlesnakes, and the leaky ceiling of Casa Janata, and the furnace that doesn't work, and all these other things, and the isolation. Finally, a friend of his convinced him to go to Seattle, so they sold the house, sold the house, Casa Janata, in 1936, October of 1936, and then made their way down the West Coast to Danville, California, where they built another house, Dow House, which is where he completed Touch of the Poet, but where he also, during this silence, when he didn't give any interviews, basically when Iceman Cometh came out in 1946, everybody thought he was dead. he was like the ghost of Broadway past or something. But during that silence, he wrote Touch the Poet, Moon for the Misbegotten, The Iceman Cometh, Morning Becomes Electra, not Morning, Moon for the Misbegotten, Long Day's Journey into Night, and Huey. I may have doubled up on one of those, but in other words, he wrote his late great plays, all of which he wrote after winning the Nobel Prize, which is an astonishing feat. Most writers, when they win the Nobel Prize, kind of shrink into themselves, and they're not sure they can ever top that. They get, intimidated by their own talent almost. O'Neill did quite the opposite. Okay, I think I'm going to end it right there. Thank you. A little shameless plug there too. Okay. All right, questions? Yeah.
You mentioned that Broadway just liked plays with happy endings. How did he break through that?
Aside from Shakespearean tragedy or something. That is an excellent question. It was okay. So he had produced many high-profile Greenwich Village productions that had gotten a lot of play in the press, and he started getting the attention of some open-minded producers. And so one of them, Arthur Hopkins, said, I would like to produce this play. And they got Robert Bennett, who was a pretty big deal at the time, to star in it. So the star power, that was important. And they found a theater for it. And he had just enough of a reputation at that time, mainly because of In the Zone, which did go to Broadway, that one-act sea play that I told you about. That they just made it work. It was a big risk, and he refused to change lines. There's a line in Beyond the Horizon when the poet brother discovers from Ruth, the woman, that she actually liked Andrew all along. It's the climax of the play, and he says, "You slut!" And in 1920, you can imagine, that really do not, you gotta cut that, and even Robert Bennett didn't want to speak the word, and O'Neill said, nothing doing, that's it, and so he made it. Yeah, it's a great question. It's just sheer will in some ways. Yeah.
So what was the catalyst, or was there a specific event or something about this man or his writings that got you so interested or
Me.
one? Yeah, you in particular,
Yes.
being scholars.
Yeah. Well, there is my mother. There's always the mother. And she actually took a course on O'Neill in 1952 at the Connecticut, it was then the Connecticut College for Women. While I'm sorry, 52. While O'Neill was then dying in a hotel room in Boston, she took it with a professor named Jamie Baird, who was greatly respected, very much respected in American letters at Connecticut College, and she fell in love with him. So we had O'Neill books all on the shelves, and she took me to my first O'Neill play in 1993, I believe, and it was The Harry Ape, which is also which in fact was Eugene O'Neill's favorite play, including Long Day's Journey into Night. And it starred Willem Dafoe, and it was this highly expressionistic performance, which means that the director kind of projects the inner psyches of the characters onto the stage through set design and sound and light, and there are kind of these grotesque exaggerations and contrasts that happen on the stage. And O'Neill was the first person to introduce expressionistic theater to America. And I saw that play and I just said, wow, I was really sold then and there, forever and for good. Just that one performance, I can, say. The other thing is, he was, my family is very Irish American, and I spent a good deal, probably a year and a half of my life in Ireland, and I knew at a certain point, my first book was on New York writing from 1880 to 1930, and I knew that I wanted, the next book I did, I wanted to tackle somebody major, and O'Neill was just the obvious choice for me. But, yeah.
What about his relationship with the children? Una and
Yeah.
Shane, we used to spend time in Bermuda, and
Yeah.
the longtime locals there had these stories about how that family was left destitute and how they would bring them food at a beautiful house. And so,
Not only left destitute, left alone.
right.
At one point, Agnes Bolton, wanting to save her marriage, recognizing that O'Neill was going to go off with Carlotta, left the kids instead kind of alone and moved to New York to try and convince him back. And, during that time, their dog died, and Shane just absolutely lost it, and, so much loss. And so, yeah, so he had 3 children, and all of their stories are fascinating in their own rights, but I'll just, summarize. His first child was Eugene Jr. He had with Kathleen Jenkins, his first wife, actually. Agnes Bolton was his second wife. Kathleen Jenkins was his first. And she was, Eugene Jr. was conceived without the benefit of clergy, if you know what I mean. And so then once her parents found out, okay, he married her once they found out that she was pregnant. And then he had quickly abandoned her and was on a she was pregnant, and spent his 21st birthday on a banana boat off the coast of Honduras. He went on a gold expedition. He only saw Kathleen Jenkins one more time, and he saw Eugene as an infant, but he was sleeping, and they didn't really say much. Although, the sleeping baby didn't say much. But Kathleen and Eugene didn't say much to one another. But O'Neill always admired her and Kathleen. And at one point he said that the woman I have given the most trouble with, the woman I gave the most trouble to has given me the least. And they were divorced, and she got full custody of Eugene Jr., who then he met when he was 11. And as a shocking surprise to both of them, they really got along. And they had a good relationship. O'Neill agreed to pay for his education and so forth. They had a good relationship. But once he married Carlotta, Shane was disinvited and sort of pushed away slowly. She liked him at first, but then she realized he could, kind of get into their cloister. And he got a PhD in classics at Yale, and he had his own literary program on radio. He was on TV all the time. He was on Jack Parr. Many of you might have seen Eugene O'Neill Jr. on Jack Parr in the 50s. It would have been the 40s. So, I don't know, maybe. But he was, is that right? No, not the 50s. 50s. Yeah, okay, so not Jack Parr. No, it can't be Jack Parr if it's the 50s because O'Neill committed suicide in 1950. Eugene Jr. committed suicide in 1950. And so he had become a severe alcoholic, and it became sort of the curse of the O'Neills. Shane first son with Agnes, also committed suicide in 1978. He was a heroin addict and an alcoholic, and actually somebody who everybody really loved. His children, he had 3 children, they really loved him. He was, by all accounts, a kind of Christ-like figure that everybody really was drawn to. Very soft, sweet, kind-hearted person, but very much controlled by his addictions, and eventually committed suicide. Okay, and then there's Una, who married Charlie Chaplin 1 month after her 18th birthday, and he was 54. They had 5 children together in California, and then he was, as we all know, he was exiled to Switzerland. They wouldn't let him in because of so-called communist sympathies, and they had another 3 children, so they had 8 children. And apparently, and she was with him to the day he died, and by all accounts, it was a marvelous marriage. They just loved each other to death and had a wonderful life together. And their children kind of all flourished, and their children's children, and their chaplains all over the place. And most of them doing very well. So it's it's bittersweet because but then when Charlie died, Una started really hitting the bottle. So one could, you don't have to get a PhD in psychology, say, well, the father figure now is gone, and she didn't have her other father figure. Her actual father was long gone, died in 1953. And then she became quite bitter and basically drank herself to death.
I mentioned
Uplifting.
I mentioned Geraldine, that beautiful
Yeah,
actress.
right, Geraldine. Yeah, Chaplin.
Not to Chicago.
Yeah, yes. Other questions? You're afraid of what I'm going to say.